Hello again, everybody. It's Sue here from the Maze Group, a specialist program for parents who have children with additional needs. And today I'm joined by Michelle. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Sue.
And tell everybody what you do.
So I have a social enterprise called Find Your Spark, initially which was focused on raising the well-being of at-risk young people. But since moving to Colchester a few years ago, I now specialise more with working with parents so that they can then help their children more effectively. Because I realised I'd have a much bigger impact and reach if I work with parents as opposed to the children. So that's now what I do.
So that's kind of what we share. We're both social entrepreneurs, both working with families. You're a psychologist and my background is a teacher. So we kind of bring a blend of skills together, don't we? So that's what we hope today is we are bringing this webinar, which is actually the third in our series about managing anxiety. So in the first webinar, I talked about what anxiety is and why it's there. And then I gave some strategies and ideas to outline how to support your child who's struggling with anxiety. And Michelle, tell everybody what you did in your webinar.
So mine was looking more at the parent and how the parent could ease their anxiety so that they can then help their child with their anxiety. So it was more focused on the parent.
Yeah, so what we thought would be useful today was kind of merge those two together. So some general overall ways of thinking about anxiety that can be beneficial for children and for adults. As we were just getting prepared for this, weren't we, Michelle? We were just talking about mental fitness and, you know, what leads to good mental health. And we kind of identified that there are two key principles in underlying mental fitness. Number one, valuing yourself. And number two, recognizing that you can change. Valuing yourself, enormously important. Obviously, enormously important for any person, any human being on the planet, but of course, especially important for parents, Michelle, wouldn't you say?
Oh, certainly, yeah. So, because a lot of the time as parents, you're the role model for your child. So if you yourself don't value yourself, the child will learn then not to value themselves. So children are like sponges. They really pick up on a lot of things that their parents do or don't do. So it's really important that it starts with you as the parent.
Yeah, and what I find is quite often parents have so much to do and so much on their plate and so overwhelmed with demands on them and their time and their emotions that they put themselves last in the list of things to do. So
Yeah.
quite often if I then ask parents, well, if you had a half a day all to yourself, what would you do? Most parents say, well, I don't know, or I'd clean out my kitchen cupboards. And I think it's so important that actually people learn to develop this mantra of telling themselves, I deserve to have some time off.
Oh,
I'm worth
definitely.
doing this because if I look after myself, I'll be able to do a better job for my family.
Mm.
So, you know, valuing yourself, that might be around, you know, just making sure that you allow yourself time to sit down with a cup of tea every day, or taking yourself off for a little walk, and there's many things that you can do to show that you value yourself. Having a nice bath, or
Yeah.
yourself a new bubble bath, something like that.
Yeah, because I think we both share within our trainings the analogy about the plane. So when you're on a plane, they say to put the mask on yourself but before you put it onto your child or your baby. And it's true, you've got to look after yourself first before you can look after anyone else. If we put it with regards to climate change or anything else, you start with yourself first and then from there you move on, not the other way around.
Yeah.
You don't try and help everyone if you're not helping yourself first. So it really does start with you.
Yeah, exactly. And then that comes from being able to value yourself. I also talk to parents who are, you know, terribly concerned about they're not doing a good enough job, but actually they're doing an amazing job. And I think people forget to give themselves credit for exactly what they are managing. Most of what people do is beat themselves up for the things that they're not getting right. So there's a really important message in there, isn't it? Is first of all, you have to learn to value yourself. And the second one is about recognizing that you can change. So having a set of behaviors that you feel are unhelpful doesn't mean they can't be changed, does it?
No, not at all. The only thing constant in life is change. So knowing that being the situation, life itself, like nothing in life is permanent. but also ourselves, knowing that we as human beings have the potential to change, and that's the whole point of being a human, is to change. So if you don't like something about yourself, it is possible to change it.
That's true. I have a friend who has terrible anxiety, and he will often say, "Oh, my anxiety means I can't do this," or "My anxiety stops me from doing that." And I'm saying, well, your anxiety is not a thing. You decide if you're doing this or not doing that. Don't let yourself have that little script that, "Oh, I have anxiety, that means I can't do this thing." You have to be able to accept that you can change things, you can make things go away. Because actually, I think what we just have to recognize is that fear is very real, but often the danger is not real. It's the fear part. And actually, once you're able to make that difference, that can help people to identify how they could actually make a change, that recognizing that it is actually possible to change. So obviously, this is about anxiety, isn't it? Which is this fear response that we all have that just gets out of control for some people and limits how they live their life. And I think I feel like I have an enormous amount of experience in this area, having had, children of my own that have had terrible struggles with anxiety. And I just thought it would be worth sharing the 4 principles that helped me, because I found it an enormously lonely place to be. So I feel like there's organisations for absolutely everything. So, if your child has any kind of a condition, you can probably find some kind of support group or help online. But I felt like I had no idea of knowing where is there support for people who are supporting children with chronic anxiety. The support's hard to get for the child. There's nothing really available for parents. So I developed, and I could have wished at the time that I had somebody to help me, but I had like 4 things that really helped. So the first one was what I call the 100-year rule, thinking to myself, will this matter in 100 years? I can think of many days when my house was an absolute pit, and the children really wanted to go out and do something. And I'd be really, worrying about the state of my house and how am I going to manage to do all of this stuff. I would just try and say to myself, what will be the thing that matters the most in 100 years? Well, in 100 years' time, nobody will remember that my house was dirty on that day. If I go out and have a nice day with my children and make good memories, that's like a legacy thing, isn't it? That that will have meant something to them, would have had a positive impact on, and when their parents, they will hopefully have learned some of those behaviours. So it's something to do with like keeping it in a time perspective as well.
Yeah, that's really good. Like, it is about making memories, isn't it, for children, and even for adults. It's like you won't look back and think, oh, I'm really pleased that I did the ironing. You'll look back and go, oh, it was really nice to have gone on a nice dog walk and the scenery that you saw. Like, that's what life's all about. It's all about making memories. It's not about the ironing.
But it's easy to feel worried about those things, that they can feel overwhelming, especially if you are, like we described at the beginning, they're a parent that just feels overwhelmed with all of the things that are on your plate. And you feel like, oh, well, actually the ironing's been sat there for 5 days now and I haven't done it, so it's the turn of the ironing to do it. It's like, it's not quite the right way to think about it, is it? The second thing I was just going to say is what I call the measuring rod. So trying to think about, on the scale of awful things that could happen to me, how bad is this thing I'm worrying about? How bad would it actually be? As a parent, one of the things that always made me really anxious was having to go and have conversations with the school about my children when they were having difficulties. So I would try to avoid it as much as possible. I did mostly emailing because I found that a bit less anxiety provoking. But there were times when I had to go and do the face-to-face talking. And so then I used this like measuring rod. So what's the worst thing that could happen? Like, what would be an awful outcome for me? Well, then thinking about, an awful outcome would be that my child gets worse and gets no help. That couldn't be any worse. So I would think, well, I might not want to go and have this conversation with the school, but I can plan the conversation because it might mean that my child gets some help. Whereas if I avoid it because I'm worrying and feeling anxious about it, it might mean I get no help and things will get worse for my children. So like using that measuring rod helped me to see, actually going to have the conversation, which is what I'm anxious about, is actually gives me the least worst outcome. It gives me the better outcome. Like not doing anything gives me a worse outcome, if you see what I mean. So it's like measuring how bad that thing could be. So
Hmm.
have you had experience of that when working with children and families, Michelle, of people thinking something would be really awful and then working with them to understand it's not?
Yeah, well, definitely. It's like that. The first, I think, self-help book I ever read. I think I was in my early 20s. Was fear. What was it called? Fear the fear. Feel the
Feel
fear.
fear.
Feel the fear, and do it anyway. And I remember that book was so life-changing for me. Obviously, the titles didn't resonate potentially, but yeah. So that book was really a game changer. It's like, yes, the fear's there. It feels real, but it's not. But it feels like it's real. And then you do it, and then you come out of it, and you're like, what was I so frightened of? It wasn't actually that scary at all. But the fear of it is often far worse than the actual reality. And then what you learn also is the more things you do in life that you're scared of, the more confident you become, because you grow as a person. It's because you're pushing your comfort zone that bit each time. So, for example, something really small, if I think of myself, is I'm not a fan of going to the car wash on my own for some strange reason. I always like to do it with my husband. And then one time I did it, and then I remember driving away from that going, oh wow, and it feels like you've achieved something, even if it's really, really small. So the more things you do that you're a little bit frightened of or you avoid, and then you do it, and the more times you do it, you kind of stretch your comfort zone, you stretch yourself, you grow as a person, you become more confident, and it's like pushing those boundaries, and then you
Yeah.
become the person you're meant to be.
Yes, exactly. And I was going to say that we always we were talking before, weren't we, about how anxiety is like a bully and
Mm,
dominates you. And when
mm,
you give into it, it's like giving into the bully, isn't it? So
mm.
it's really important to learn when you feel that anxiety washing over you, how can you push back and stop that bully from taking over by exactly doing that, thinking about how can I be brave enough to try this thing that I'm actually really frightened of.
Yeah, yeah, and I learned this new strategy about, because a lot of the time when people have anxiety or any sort of fear, it's thoughts they have in their mind rushing through their head, and it's over and over again. It's playing, it's playing, it's playing, and we don't do anything to replace those thoughts. So it's just there, and it's making you feel the anxiety knot in your stomach and tearful or whatever it portrays for you. So this strategy that I learned was that if you imagine that those thoughts are coming from a person and you give that person a name, so say for example you give that person a name of Cara, and when you're hearing those thoughts, you actually say to Cara, Cara, I'm not listening to you today. That's not helping me. That's not making me feel good. I would like you to be quiet now. And the more times you do it, the quieter those negative anxiety thoughts will get. And then it'll become a habit. And then eventually those thoughts, one would hope, would go away because you're not giving it the energy or the power anymore, just like a bully.
And
So
that's really good. I love that analogy because actually
Mhm.
it makes you feel like you've been brave and stood up to something. And instead of it
Up
just
the
being
bully.
a thought, you've actually given it an identity, haven't you? And said,
Yeah,
brave enough to push back as if it were a person. It's a really
exactly.
great strategy. Really great. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's about learning that those thoughts, they're not you. Our thoughts aren't real. They're outside of ourselves, and it's giving yourself that separation,
Yeah, that's it. It's
which
like
is
it's
quite
like what we're saying at the
profound.
beginning, isn't it? Recognizing that the fear that you feel is real, but the danger that you're thinking about is not real. Just a couple of other things that I just wanted to share that had been useful for me in my life. And one thing was this about worrying about what I call the unlikely. So like a thought would pop into my head and I would have to teach myself, it's just really unlikely that that would happen. So somebody very close to me was very sick when I was in my 20s. And it unsettled me and gave me such massive anxiety that I felt like every time I had a headache, I thought I've got something incurable in my head. Or if I had a stomach ache, I've got something incurable I'm going to die of a stomach disease. Or, I just like had these terrible fears all of the time. But actually what I learned to do was try to look at, what are the risks? What's the statistical likelihood of any of that ever happening to me? And it was absolutely tiny. And it's the same, isn't it, when it's a similar way that they approach people who are frightened of flying, to look at the statistical safety of flying versus
Mm,
the statistical safety of driving a car. And if you
mm,
actually looked into it, you'd probably never get into a car again.
mm,
So it's this thing about looking out for things that you're worrying about, they're actually highly unlikely, and being able to tell yourself they're really unlikely and here's what the likelihood is, and going along with that is what I call the unresolved. So this thing about, you can spend all of your time worrying about, oh, this thing might happen, what will I do if this thing happens, and you spend so much time worrying about it, and then it actually never happens anyway.
Yeah.
And this is effectively sort of the situation we're a little bit in now, although, you know, the worst thing that we could have imagined has actually been happening with this horrible virus. But what it teaches us is that everything is uncertain, and you can't change that. That's like the only certain thing, isn't it? Uncertainty. And what you have to do is just learn to live with that.
Yeah, exactly. And which follows on from the webinar that I did, where I spoke about how routine is key to helping ease anxiety, and how if you have a routine in place, especially if you've got children of additional needs, that really helps them with their anxiety, because they can predict what's going to come next. It's going to be uncertain, and be okay with that, being okay with uncertainty, because like you say, the only thing that is certain is uncertainty. And if you can be okay with that and feel at ease with it, and feel stillness, and feel like it's okay, whatever way this goes, I'm flexible, I'm going to be okay and relaxed, that is where your true power lies. But it will take practice.
Yeah, it takes a lot of practice, doesn't it? Because we're in scary times, aren't we? But I feel that the best way that any of us can manage our anxiety is by talking about it and writing it down, and turning those feelings into concrete actions. So, you know, one thing that helped me a lot at the time was first of all thinking, what am I worrying about? So what specific thing, instead of just having this general, I just feel worried about absolutely everything. What are those things exactly? Write them down. And then for each of those things that you're worrying about, to then think, well, can I do anything about it? Can I do anything about it? Well, if the answer is yes, well, what can you do? Make a plan. And if the answer is no, accepting you can't do anything about it, I might as well keep myself busy, distract myself, go and do something else, and try as much as I can to not let Cara keep telling me to worry about this thing. So, like, for example, there was a few years ago some big changes going on for my husband with his work, and there was a problem, a possibility he might lose his job. So I was terribly worried about that, because I just started up Maze, I had absolutely no income at all, and I was thinking, well, what will happen with us? So I made a plan. I thought, well, we could sell our house, you know, move into something smaller. This is how we can. I did a plan for all our finances, and I worked out, we would actually manage, we'd be fine. And then once I'd got that plan, I was okay. So I feel like that is a really helpful thing to do. Think about what's the worst that could happen and plan for it, because then you don't need to worry about it then, you can park it.
Exactly. And who's to say that the worst thing that could happen to us might not be a blessing in disguise? You never know. Yeah, you might think, oh gosh, moving into a rented property, it's going to be awful, it's going to be horrible, but you never know, you could have a really happy experience there. So it's like sometimes getting things that you weren't entirely expecting might be exactly what you needed.
And I think the other thing is especially in the times that we're currently in with the COVID situation, is to say to yourself, can I do anything now? Like, what can I do right now? Well, actually, right now, the only things that any of us can control are our own actions, aren't they? You know, we can't control what's happening to this virus, but we can control how much we expose ourselves to risk and how we behave, and kinds of things, isn't it? So thinking about, what now is there that I can do, that I think that's really important right now, isn't it? Some things are under our control and some things are not at all under our control.
Exactly. You took the words right out of my mouth. I was just
We've been working together for so long now.
Sharing the same brain.
I just wanted to also say is that I've been thinking about these, like, there are the problem with anxiety is that there's a number of like vicious circles. So with anxiety, you have this fear about something, so you avoid doing it, and that avoidance leads to more fear. So the more you avoid something, the more fearful you would become, and it feels like the only thing you really want to do when you're fearful is withdraw. So I know a lot of people are really anxious about going into like social situations. They just have this enormous fear about people judging them. But in actual fact, you know, there's this what's it called, spotlight phenomena, isn't it? They showed in a study that most people think the spotlight is on them all the time, but everybody thinks the spotlight is on them the whole time. So nobody's actually really paying that much attention to each other. So we get these anxieties about going into social situations that are actually unfounded because nobody's actually really looking or paying attention.
No. That's actually reminded me of an example when I was working with a parent one-to-one. She was a lovely, lovely parent, and she had a real anxiety about exactly that, and she worried about what other parents thought of her, and she was really worried about wearing shorts. And she thought, oh, everyone's going to be staring at my legs aren't going to look nice and everything. And I said, not to be rude to you, but people aren't even going to notice your legs. People have got so much on their mind, they're probably not even going to look. And she was like, okay. By the end of the 4 weeks of us working together, the last session, she came in and she was wearing a pair of shorts.
Oh, that's great.
Which was one of her kind of homeworks. And I think she'd been wearing it a few times that week. And she said, Michelle, I just feel so amazing. I feel just so confident. And I've had parents actually say how beautiful I'm looking in my shorts. And it was all in her head. The actual reality of it was she looked absolutely wonderful. So it's about stepping outside of our thoughts.
Yeah, and I'm sure that would be familiar to anybody watching this, that we've all had those situations where you think everybody's going to be looking and they're not at all looking. So that's the thing, isn't it? You know, that avoidance thing just increases the fear. So it's really important to notice that. But the other circle is that when you do avoid something, you would then feel a sense of relief. Oh, thank goodness, I don't have to do it. And that leads to that thought, I'm going to avoid that all the time. The trouble is that then leads to more avoidance. So this is just a reinforcing cycle, isn't there? Avoiding it, feeling better because you didn't go, but actually what's happening is your fear and avoidance are just like increasing the whole time.
Yeah, because whatever you resist persists. So if you keep resisting something, it's not going to go away completely. It will pop up again later on in your life. So the best thing to do is to bite the bullet and just feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Because then what happens is when you avoid it is you have this like then massively increased sense of fear. And your activity is massively restricted. So your world becomes very small. And then what happens is you lose all your confidence. It's much harder, isn't it? So it's so important to try, isn't it, to like tackle that vicious circle, reinforcing circle of like avoiding things because you're anxious and just trying to do something about it. But what I think is also really important is like feeling anxiety and then recognizing what you're feeling and learning to try to manage it by some kind of relaxation strategy or what we call stillness.
Yes. Yeah, so recently this year, I was saying to Sue earlier, I feel like 2020 has been the year of stillness for me and slowing down quite a lot, because previously I would be rushing around doing so many things and to-do list that long. Now my to-do list is a lot shorter and I spend a lot more time doing relaxing activities. So I spend every morning when I wake up in the morning, I go downstairs and I read for about an hour, maybe 2, and I sit with my dog. And I give that like real priority, whereas before I'd get up and I would be checking my emails and I'd be getting ready in a rush, going and having a shower. But now I'm like, no, this time is my time, my precious time. And it really sets your day up doing that. It makes you feel a lot more still throughout the day.
Well, I know I was going to say, because I was talking to a group of parents last night and we were just talking about exactly that. What is it that is relaxing for each of us? Some people were saying how much they love to just be in their garden and like look at what they've planted and look at things and realise that it doesn't matter what happens in the day, these things are still growing. You know, come out and you've had a whole day, the trees are still here. For some people feeling like that's what's relaxing for them. Somebody else is saying, I get up before my children. I'm up at the crack of dawn, 5 o'clock, because my children are up at 6. So at 5 o'clock, I'm up because I just need that hour to just want to go. And somebody said, oh, I go out and they walk their dog for that 1 hour in the morning. Somebody else said, I just need to do my exercise. I just need to do some kind of a workout. I just need to do it by myself. So I'm up early in the morning to do it before the children are up. Other people saying, I go for a walk or I sit in my garden. somebody else said, I've just been binge watching comedies, so trying to find anything that just means that I can have a laugh. I just need to laugh every day.
Yeah.
So it's actually really
Brilliant.
good that everybody does really know what is relaxing for them. And I think that's so important, isn't it? To just like make sure that you make time for that every day.
Yeah.
And like you said, just like stop rushing.
Yes.
Try to move slowly, walk slowly. I was just telling you before that I've spent my life doing that, being that rushing about person. And I now and again, often, not just now and again, I often find myself like completely all clenched up inside. You know, my stomach is tense and my shoulders are up here. And I think, let me just relax, you know. Take a deep breath, you know, and just try and find some kind of peace, even if I'm just about to dash off and do everybody's shopping. Just to try and find time to be a little bit still.
And that, like you said from the start of this webinar, it's about kind of, that shows that you're valuing yourself. So if you start off your day giving yourself that time, you're sending yourself a message to your brain that you are worthwhile and you are valuable and you are good enough and all these things. That's really important. So it doesn't matter how you do it. Like, I think the one about the comedies, that's fantastic. And I know Simon Cowell does that. Every morning he wakes up and he watches cartoons and he watches things just to make himself laugh. And I think it's really, the morning is such a pivotal kind of poignant start. How you start your day really makes a difference to the rest of your day. So even if you've got 15 minutes of a morning, meditate, writing, reading, watching comedy, walking, whatever it is, running, something that you enjoy, your day, I think, will go a lot better, rather than if you wake up and then you've just already straight on and you're panicking and you're anxious and you're rushing around. The rest of your day is going to feel fairly similar to that.
And thinking about children, as you said at the beginning, children are like sponges. You're always stressed and dashing about, and always, you know, at the end of your tether. You find that's how your children will behave too.
Indeed.
It's like the best gift that you can give your family, isn't it?
Yeah.
Take care of yourself, value yourself, and learn how to relax and prioritize relaxing and stillness in your day.
And they'll learn from that themselves, where they'll then be still themselves, one would hope. If they say, oh, mummy's like, you know, sitting down, relaxing, reading a book, maybe I'll do that. And so then their energy levels will also become a bit more relaxed. They're picking it all up. They're learning so much from you as a parent.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds like a really, that sounds like we've come full circle in our conversation, doesn't
definitely.
it? Just like a good place to say we'll conclude it there.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Michelle, for your time. And hopefully people have found this little webinar useful.
Yeah, definitely. And if anyone wants to get in contact with me, I've got some funding to be able to work with parents. So you can contact Sue or myself and I'll be happy to help.
Sounds fantastic. Well done. And I equally, even though we're in lockdown, I'm still running the Maze Specialist Parenting Programme, now doing it online via Zoom. So if you'd like to join me, also get in touch. So that's great. Thanks so much for your time, Michelle.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.